Many theologians now believe that it's important for Christians to learn about Judaism and Jewish ideas from Jews themselves. With us today is Rabbi Dr. Danielle Hartman. Hi, Danielle.
Good morning, Marcy.
So what does exile mean to the Jews?
Exile is tragedy. Exile is reality. Exile is also opportunity. It's tragedy because it is indicative of the fact that the Jewish people did not do all that they had to do.
So the Jews sinned?
Oh, absolutely. The Bible is unequivocal. Because of our sins, we were exiled from the land. The land of Israel, where God and the Jewish people were supposed to fulfill their covenant, required of us a certain standard of behavior, both in our relationship to God and in our relationship to our fellow human beings. And according to the Bible, we failed on both of those dimensions. So the Bible is unbelievably unapologetic. Sometimes as a Jew, I wish they would have whitewashed some of the story. But it just tells it as it is. We were an imperfect society.
So how is Jewish theology about exile any different than what Christians have been teaching for close to 2,000 years, that the Jews are eternally punished by God for Jewish sins?
You see, the first part is tragedy. The second part is reality. That the exile is not a remarkable event. Exile is part of the human interaction with God. It starts in Genesis 2, when God creates a Garden of Eden to place there humankind. But God's expectations from us were unrealistic. And part of what our tradition teaches us is that exile, it's a natural fact that you're constantly going to be moving in a certain sense between closeness and distance, because that's the nature of God. And that we human beings are moments going to be closer and moments going to be farther away. But the key point is that once it's reality, it doesn't constitute a schism or a break, an ending of the relationship. This is the key feature of the Jewish understanding of exile. See, exile wasn't God saying, I'm leaving you. In the rabbinic tradition, God also goes into exile with us. So we had an aspiration of living in one place together with one dream. That didn't work out. And so there's a tragic dimension, but our relationship still continues.
So once God is with the Jews in exile, can't God stay there? Can't the Jews stay there? Why is there any need to return? God and the people are together.
It's a beautiful question, and the answer is in a Jewish, yes and no. It's like you're right and also you're right. Now, one of the desires to come back to Israel, irrelevant of the religious connotations of it, grew out of the political reality of the danger that exile embodied. Exile was dangerous for Jews. Exile was homelessness. Exile was anti-Semitism. Exile was oppression. And so part of the aspiration to go back to Israel had nothing to do with religious ideology, and in fact, much of it was led by very, very non-observant Jews. It was just, we want to be safe. We want to be a normal people like every other people. So one dimension of Israel is it's political safety. It's to give to Jews what everybody else takes for granted.
But now there are so many places in the world where Jews are safe and are thriving and have interesting and growing Jewish communities with presumably God with them.
Oh, absolutely.
So are they in exile?
No, those Jews, one of the major things that happened is that those Jews really don't see themselves as exile as anymore. They see themselves as home. And part of what happened, and this is the third dimension of exile that I mentioned, and that is that exile is opportunity. Exile in our tradition also became an opportunity to learn. Exile was both tragic, exile is inevitable because it's reality, but exile also is the way in which you constantly think about who you are and who you want to be. So
what kinds of things did Jews learn?
Like for example, when we said because of our sins we were exiled, we said it was our religious leadership wasn't moral enough, or Jewish people didn't go beyond the law, or Jews didn't treat each other with gentleness. Each time the idea of exile was the way in which Jews said we need to grow. So failure is not an end. Failure is not, it's over. It's not like as if in life there's a test and it's, the minute you didn't get 100, the story's over. Not at all. Failure, if it's used correctly, is actually an essential part of the way you grow. Like if you would look at your life, or I know it's certainly true about my life, I'm not the sum total of my successes. If I really look at myself, I'm the sum total of what I did in response to my failures and to my pain and my suffering. That's what shaped me as a human being. And for the Jewish people, that's what I mean by exile as an opportunity. Exile, pain and suffering. I don't want to waste my energy becoming bitter, neither towards Christians or Muslims, and for that matter, even to God.
But then it sounds as if exile is really a good thing.
Exile is an inevitable part of your story, but at the same time, it's inevitable, and it will always be there. And some of these failings are going to be dramatic, and they're going to be horrific, and sometimes the pain is going to be almost too much to bear. But at times, I like failure with like a little bit of suffering. I don't want like too much suffering. It's like, I'm not, in that sense, I'm not masochistic. But there is no doubt that exile enables the Jewish people to grow. And as a result, these types of experiences are always going to come back, and our challenge will be whether we're willing to learn a lesson from them. And so, for example, in the land of Israel today, I don't only have to leave the land or to go into exile in order to be able to learn. I could look at war. I could look at intifadas. I could look at various moments. I could look at occupation. I could look at individual deaths, sufferings, and I could say, what did I do? Am I all that I need to be?
So are you suggesting that exile exists even for Jews who've returned to the land?
I would say it has to. And this is the shift, is that exile, we don't have to live in a world in which it's either exile or redemption. It's either we have everything or we have nothing. That's not the way Jews ultimately looked at exile. Exile is a reality, part of our existence. We have to find a way for it not to be devastating. We have to ask ourselves, how do we learn from it? How do we grow from it? How is it an essential part of the process of life as Jews live with God? Because it's an inevitable part of that life.
But aside from the safety issue, why then is the return to the land important?
We Jews could live in Israel and we can live in exile. And exile, as long as it's safe, is home. And so we could live there and thrive, and we have in fact found a way to do exactly that. But Israel also embodies something additional. It's where God, Torah, and Israel could live in its fullest sense. See, Torah is not a way of life for how I'm supposed to live as an individual.
What do you mean by Torah?
I mean Jewish law. Jewish law is not how I'm supposed to conduct myself in my kitchen or what I'm supposed to do in my private domain. All of our religious traditions, and Judaism as well, have a vision about the public sphere, have a vision about justice and kindness, and about the way in which our tradition shapes the totality of life. Now, there is no doubt that we can live in exile, we can have multiple homes. But the idea of Israel is where we can be a sovereign people, not just safe from external enemies, but sovereign to give expression within the public domain for the ideals and values that we care about. So I yearn to come back to Israel because I have a vision of social justice. I yearn to come back to Israel because I have a vision of how I would like to treat the elderly. I would like to come back to Israel because I have a vision of how I would like to use my power, how I would like to treat the stranger who lives in my midst. I want to fulfill my Torah in a way that embodies the public sphere. That Israel is the opportunity for Judaism to shape a marketplace.
How can you be so sure, though, that God, who punished the Jews and sent the Jews into exile, is ready for Jews to return? How do you know that God has forgiven the Jews for Jewish sins?
You see, you never really know. But part of what we've learned already in the Bible is that, and you see echoes of this in Psalms, and this is in essence the lesson of Job, is that not all suffering is also the result of sin. And ultimately, when Jews looked at exile, we saw it as a result of failing, but we also saw it as part of reality. It wasn't just the result of sin. God has calculations for history which are God's calculations. And at some point, you have to learn from exile. You have to learn from suffering, but you don't feel broken by it. You don't continue to feel responsible for it. You continue your life. Now, we Jews believe that our life with God has continued. God is with us. God's love for us is eternal in that sense. So we're not waiting for this, for some force from heaven declaring, okay, you've sinned, the punishment is up, you've paid your dues. That dynamic is, in religious life, it's a much more fluid dimension. But part of what we're looking for is that it's part of the Zionist revolution, and this is part of religious life as well, is that God also helps those who help themselves.
So you're suggesting then that Jewish return to the land is one expression of Jews deciding to come back together with God.
There is no doubt that we are deciding to come back. We hope that God will bless that return. We don't know. In the Jewish tradition, we're very hesitant about talking about the end of days. When we speak about our Messiah, we say, I believe in the coming of the Messiah. Even though he will tarry, I still believe in him. We have a tarrying Messiah. We don't know. It's like we don't have this. We don't know what the end of days is going to be. Our job is to get up in the morning and to ask ourselves, what does a life with God require of me? How do I live a life with God? How do I live a life of God within my sovereign country, in which I could create a society which is worthy of, not just of God, but worthy of my covenant, worthy of what a Jewish society should be in the best sense of the term. And at the same time, and if I'm in diaspora, or if I'm in exile, or if I'm in another home, how do I maximize that? But together, our job is to get up and to say, get to work. Get to work. You're not going to wait for signs from God. Afterwards, don't worry, God will talk. We're going to interpret afterwards, what is the meaning of what God just said? Did God say we did something wrong? Is God saying we have to change? Is God doing a Jobian story right now? That's for theologians, but a real people has to get up in the morning and build a life. And our return to Israel is the Jewish people's decision to return to God, to return to sovereignty, to take responsibility for our destiny. It's for all of the above.
It sounds like there's a big job ahead of the Jewish people.
There always is. God willing, there always will be such a job.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.